Hello, my dear friend, and welcome to the next episode of Book Talks with Keith. I'm your host, author J. Keith Brown, and I am so very, very thankful that you have chosen to listen or watch this podcast. I had a desire as an author to do this podcast and bring authors on to get to know them a little bit. Selfishly, I love to talk with authors, so this gives me a chance to do that. And then it gives them a chance to put themselves out before you and tell you a little bit about their passion work. So that's why we do this podcast. And I really do appreciate you supporting it. Please do listen. Please do share it. Please do tell others about it so that we can um, introduce these wonderful authors to more people. All right. Today, speaking of wonderful author, I have one with me. And to the podcast, I welcome author Brooke French. Hey, Brooke, welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you deciding to come on. And Brooke shared with me before we hit record that this is her first chance to be on a podcast. So I am honored that she has chosen to be on this one. And I look forward to knowing all about you and your book. And speaking of you, I think it's important, as I say just about every episode, that the reader get to know you a little bit because I think that just makes the work that much more special to them. So, Brooke, tell us a little bit about who you are, if you would.
Sure. So I am a recovering lawyer and now author and a boy mom. So I don't have a lot of free time, but what time I do have, I usually spend either reading, researching for a book, or writing whatever project is on my plate at the moment.
That's really good. How old is your son?
So I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, I was just sitting here. I can actually remember barely my son being those ages. My son is 30 now, and he is about to make me a grandfather for the first time. So
Oh,
it goes by very quickly, Brooke. So do take every moment that you can to spend with those precious children of yours. Um, Now, I know you just said, and you said it very quickly, that you were a lawyer. Now, I know that as a lawyer, you've written plenty of briefs, you've written all types of things, and I know you had to write plenty of papers in law school. Having gone to graduate school myself, I know how that is. So, how did you get into writing this? How did that transition go for you?
yeah. So I think I always knew I wanted to write, creative writing, but I was afraid to jump into it. I didn't understand how that could be a career when I was younger. I didn't see the path. And so I practiced as a lawyer for 14 years. I was a litigator with a big firm in Atlanta.
Wow.
And I had an epiphany one day driving home, very long commute. And I realized that writing was really what would make me happy, and I think a lot of people spend their whole lives without realizing what their actual passion is, what's the thing they're really drawn to do. And so
Mm.
I went home and I talked to my husband about what that might look like and how could I make that work. And I did try to write while I was practicing for a time, but that they're I don't want to say they're mutually exclusive. Some people might be able to do it. I couldn't. The hours really didn't permit it. And so when my husband had a change in his job situation that gave us a little more flexibility, I decided to take some time off from practice and start writing full time. I've been doing that since 2018, and I can't imagine ever not doing it. Now it is the only thing I can imagine doing. So
That's fantastic.
yeah.
I know that day that you went home to have this conversation with your husband, I can only imagine that the the nervousness that you must have experienced in doing this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have to say his reaction was better than I expected, because obviously, unless you're a very successful writer, you are not going to make as much money as you are going to make as a successful lawyer. So, that requires some adjustment and some faith on both of our parts to try it and to see if it would work. And, it's not that writing is an easy path, especially when you don't have to do it when you start, when you start your first book, you really don't know how to write and you don't know how to publish and you don't know how to market. And so you have to learn all of those things. And I've been really fortunate that it has worked out.
So, tell me a little bit. One of the things because I have published both nonfiction and fiction, one of
Mhm.
the things I'm always interested in, and I will admit this is a little weakness for me, is the the adjustment from the nonfiction writing, in your case, very specific and very technical writing, from that to the creative, more expressive writing of fiction.
Yeah.
How did that transition go for you? I mean, was that a challenge, or was it a natural flow?
Um, Gosh, well, they're so radically different, I mean, legal writing it's persuasive writing. It's just really, really different. I don't know that there really was a logical flow from one to the next. I think, if anything, the carryover had more to do with research because being a lawyer requires a lot of in-depth, very precise research. Getting things wrong is not an option. And that has helped me as a fiction writer because I am very careful with my research and I enjoy the research side of things, especially because I write in a field that isn't my own field. I write thrillers that have a science basis, and I don't have a science background, so I have
Mhm.
to be really careful and really thorough because people will catch you, So
Yes,
I don't want that.
yes, they will. It's simple as writing of a place that truly exists, and if you take some creative um, flexibility with a place, they'll say that street doesn't exist, or that
Mm,
place is, so yes, a reader can be very serious about the information that you put even in works of fiction. So I
yeah,
understand that. So I am curious though, because you were practicing law, and you had this epiphany, as a lot of us do, especially as we, get a little bit older, and go like, you know what, this is not what I need to, do. This is not the thing that's charging my batteries. This is not what's lighting me up. How did you come to the terms of saying, okay, you know what? An author is what I really want to do.
yeah.
That couldn't have been something that, I mean, maybe it did, but I would be surprised if it's something that you did just like, you know, quickly. I would think there would have been some type of passion about this over some time. Maybe did you write, fiction or literature as you were growing up? Was this something that you enjoyed expressing yourself in your life? What was the, catalyst to get you from this to writing passion for fiction? I find that interesting.
Yeah, well, I have always been a voracious reader, and I still am. The idea of creating those stories myself really always spoke to me. And I had tried several times over the years. I took some creative writing classes and attempted to put together drafts of but it was
Right.
very excuse me, it was very unsuccessful. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't have the bandwidth to give it what it needed. But I could tell that when I did it, it felt really fulfilling. I really enjoyed it. And I had taken creative writing in college, the classes that were offered there. I was an English major in undergrad. So I had a lot of exposure to those ideas and to writing, in some instances, fiction, mainly nonfiction then. But yeah, it just built up over time. And I think I knew this is going to make me really happy. I mean, I can never remember a time in my life when I didn't want to spend as much of it in a book as I could. I mean, I was the kid who would go to the library and check out the maximum number every single week. And it's just, books have always been a happy place. And now that I write them, I feel the same way about doing that. It's a happy place to be.
A lot of authors are obviously avid readers. I mean, I think that's usually goes hand in hand. I will confess, dear listener, please forgive the old man here. I was not a fan of reading for a lot of my life. when I was in school, I remember a book report. I had to do an oral book report, and I was a good public speaker. So I read a book that was about 18 pages, and I did I did an oral report on it and got away with it, made an A. But that was the type of reader I was as a young man. But I did fall in love with it later, and I appreciate, you know, the beauty of the written word. And for you, I am curious, Brooke, when I talk to fiction writers, especially because I know what the answer to this question is going to be when I talk to nonfiction writers.
Mhm.
But when I'm talking to fiction writers, um, there are often different ways of putting that creative story together, that plot
Mhm.
together. For some people, it is very, and I have a guess of what it's going to be for you, but let me put it out there, and you can really destroy my preconceived thought here. I would expect some writers have a very strategic outline plan for their book from start to finish. And some of them will pick sticky notes all over the wall with it drawn out. They will do diagrams. They will have outlines pinned down on paper, all kinds of things. And then there are other writers who write fiction, not as much murder mysteries, because there really does have to be some planning in that,
Mhm.
and some suspense. But for a lot of general fiction, there are writers who will sit down at the computer each day and go, okay, characters, where are we going today?
Mhm.
So, what type of person are you, Brooke, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I'm definitely in the first category, as I bet you suspected. Yeah, I'm a plotter for sure. Not just because I'm a lawyer, and so I have a very efficiency is I find inefficient things to be really difficult, and I think and I'm not casting any aspersions on people who are pantsers, but which is of course the opposite, where you let it just flow out. But I do think that that tends to be a longer process. It requires more editing. And I think if something is plotted in advance, then you kind of where things are going to fall and how to put them together. And then also with thrillers and mysteries, anything suspense, anything where you are kind of laying out pieces in a very precise way because you want reveals to come at times that are, as engaging as possible. And you want to give the reader enough that they feel like they kind of understand, but they don't really understand. And, it's not satisfying if those things don't come out at the right time. And so I think writing the kinds of things that I write, it would be pretty hard to do as a pantser. It's possible. I think you could go in and edit it in, but that's not how my brain works. So
That's
I tend to do a pretty lengthy outline, and then about midway through the book, usually I will figure out that I have done it wrong, and I will go in and fix it. And then about a quarter of a way past that, I'll realize, no, 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 that wasn't what it should be. And then I'll fix it. So I do edit as I go, but I edit the continuing outline of the project.
I get that, and I knew that's where you were going to probably wind up, based on, what I knew about you already, and then obviously the type of books you write. And you are absolutely right. I know that my main writing in fiction is general fiction, and I love character driven stories, and so because of my creative um, speaking background and the I was the guy that in graduate school that never planned his speeches. I knew what I was basically going to talk about. I got up and I was able to do it. I mean,
Mhm.
so that's sort of how I enjoy writing. So it's a lot different than like you.
Mhm.
But when I wrote One Suspense, and I'm starting another a sequel to that one. It has to be planned. So I agree with you completely on that. So, um, when you write in your fiction, now how many books have you written thus far, Brooke?
So I have two that are published. I have a third that comes out this October, and I'm
Okay.
working on a fourth right now.
Okay. Now, are those at all related? Are they separate books completely, or are they part of a series?
So I have two series. I have the first out in each series right now,
Okay.
and the second in one of my series comes out this year. So my plan is to try to get a book out a year in each series. We'll see if the muse agrees with me.
That's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm right with you. You and I are on the same page on that. So, what is? if I might ask, and we'll get into the book specifically in a moment, listener, because I do want to get there. We're going to get there. I want her to really share with us about these books. But before I do, um, are these books, what is your chosen person that you typically like to write in? Are you first person, third person? What is the voice behind the books?
Yeah, I write in third person, and I think I started doing it that way without really making it a conscious choice. And then because I had started doing it that way, I still do it that way. So yeah, I'm third person across the board.
And I think that's a great thing. I got myself in trouble because the two series I'm writing, one is in first person, one is in third person.
Oh, that's hard. Yeah.
And the other day I was writing and I suddenly realized I wrote a chapter that was in the wrong person. So I had to
Mhm.
go back and rewrite it. And I was going like, oh, I got confused. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, very smart to keep it across the board. So good for you. All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these books specifically. Tell us about what the titles and tell us a little bit about us because I want you right now to make this listener or viewer want to rush out right now and grab both of these books. So let's do
All
it.
right, let's do it. Okay, so the first book that I published is this one. This is Inhuman Acts. And this series is the one I just finished writing the second in. So this one follows a scientist. She's a disease ecologist named Letty Duquesne. In the world that she lives in, the balance of nature has shifted some, not for the better. And there's an increasing incidence of the transmission of zoonotic disease, so diseases that come from animals to people, and animals are attacking people with more regularity. So nature has just shifted badly. And Letty is a scientist who's trying to figure out why. In each particular case, what's going on, what caused it. Inhuman Acts follows her as she tries to uncover the source of a human rabies outbreak in Chattanooga. I researched this book. I wrote this book because I realized how terrifying rabies is. I mean, just terrifying and completely underappreciated
And
as a
painful for
threat.
those that suffer with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% fatal pretty much once you're symptomatic. You can have it in your system for 10 years before it shows up. It's really scary. And I think the reason that Americans don't see it as that is because it's really under control in the US. They've done a great job of controlling it, but not in this book. So that's this one. Um, the other one is the Carolina variant. This is my outbreak book. So I wrote this one, actually wrote this one first, even though it was published second. And in a really unfortunate timing, I finished it in early 2020. So, right as COVID was hitting, really becoming gnarly, this book was ready to go. And it was absolutely terrible timing. So I shoved it in a drawer and I wrote the other one. So that's why the order of publication is backwards. So Inhuman Acts got published first, and then the Carolina variant. This one specifically, this series follows a character called Tess Oliver. She is a young lawyer. So you can see, I think often the first book parallels your own life a little bit more, right? Because it feels
Mhm.
comfortable.
Yes.
She finds a encoded document in a defendant's safe deposit box. And she has an eidetic memory, which is similar to a photographic memory, probably the closest thing in real life to an actual photographic memory. So when the document's destroyed in a fire, the only real copy of the document is in Tess's mind. And an outbreak of a hemorrhagic fever is happening, which turns out that this document that she has might be the key to stopping it. But of course, there are people who would prefer that their plans not be spoiled. So, right. So that is the Carolina variant, and I'm about to start the second in this series now. So that's what'll come up
Nice.
next.
Nice. And where's I know the other one you mentioned Chattanooga,
Mhm.
Chattanooga, Tennessee, if you're not familiar with Chattanooga. Where does this one take place? If Carolina is in the name, so
It's actually in Atlanta. I spent a lot of my life in the South. I'm originally from Mississippi. I lived for 20 years in Georgia, 20 plus years. I lived in Chattanooga briefly. I now spend a lot of time on the West Coast as well, but I don't feel like I've been on the West Coast enough yet to set books there. So I'm still sort of writing things set in my comfort zones when I feel like I'm not going to get called out on not knowing the name of a street or, one of the, one of the geographic get it wrong things that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these two are Chattanooga and Atlanta. And then the one I just finished writing after having said, I'm not going to do this, is set mostly in Alaska, where I have not spent a lot of time.
Wow.
But it has been so much fun to do the research to do it justice. And I think I have. I think it's
Well,
good.
wow, that's exciting. It gives you and it gives you a chance to go in your mind and visit these places and really bring them to other people's knowledge and let them peek into what you're seeing. I think that's so cool.
Mhm.
Was now the both of these, as you heard, dear listeners, I'm going to ask this question because I'm just curious. Both of these series do deal, like you said, with science. Even for the attorney, there's some science in this stuff because
Mhm.
evidently this has become a real passion for you, Brooke. But I'm wondering, um, you wrote one before COVID, which
Mhm.
is interesting because the way you set it up sort of relates a little bit about COVID and what we thought about how it originated and things like that. So it's an interesting connection. So, um, wasn't that book written before COVID actually started?
It was, and it was wild because I had finished it and had it, and it was edited. I got it back from the editor. I was ready to pitch it, and then COVID hit, and I had to go, take a step back from it, which is part of the reason that I did put it on hold because I thought,
Hmm.
I don't know how this. At that time, we didn't know how the pandemic was going to affect the world,
Right.
and I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if I've got this really wrong? And it's been funny. I didn't have it wrong. Most everything that I thought would happen happened. Thankfully, not everything. And thankfully, COVID is not a fatal hemorrhagic fever, as I had imagined the outbreak to be. Um, but everything down to putting little ticks of painter's tape on the floor to get people to stand a certain
Sure.
distance apart in line. I mean, I did that in my book before I saw that in real life. And I thought, well, this is just wild. Um, but yeah, it was a little more accurate than I hope. I teased people that I think I should write rom-coms just in case I really am, having some kind of like manifesting it out into the world.
Exactly. Or at least prophesying about it or something.
Yeah.
Um, I could see the temptation. And do you think that you made the right decision in holding off on that? Do you think that there was any concern with maybe thinking that someone might be thinking that you're taking advantage of a world pandemic? And there are a lot of people that tried to take advantage of certain aspects of that.
Mhm.
I know that probably you wish this would have been published a year or two before COVID. That way, you really would have looked like,
Yeah.
you know, and you would have been able to prove that you had all these thoughts, which I trust you, but not everybody will, obviously. Um, but uh, do you think you made the right decision?
I do. I do for a variety of reasons. I think, when I pitched it then, I reached out to agents and I was pitching that book, and that's what I would hear from them. Like, this is so good, but we can't sell it because it would feel like profiteering right now. And I thought, that's right. That feels really icky. I don't want to do that.
Right.
It was my first book. It was my book baby, and so I was
Hmm.
kind of heartbroken because you've put so much into it and I had worked so hard on it, and had so much fun writing it, but it wasn't at the right time. And so I started the other book really as a way to sort of, salve the wound, feel better. I sat down, during the pandemic. My kids were outside playing and I was sitting out there with them, and I just sat down and started writing the prologue for Inhuman Acts, to take my mind off of it because it was really making me unhappy, to know that I had
Hmm.
to set that
Sure.
book
Yeah.
aside. And it made it all the better in the end because the day that Inhuman Acts launched, my pre-orders came in pretty strong on it. And the publisher reached out to ask me, do you have any other projects? And I said, well, actually I do. And so I sent them the Carolina variant the following day, and they loved it. So it worked out great. So they came out fairly close together because of that. I have one that the Inhuman Acts came out September of 2022. And then Carolina variant came out in June of 2023. So they were pretty
Mhm.
close.
which which is good for you, but in a way, but it also makes it hard because when you're trying to, in case you don't know, listener or viewer, when you have a book that comes out, you really do have to make that your passion project at that time when it comes. You've spent all this time writing it, you've poured yourself into it, but that is just a small part of the whole, because you then have to do a lot of marketing and work and selling and pitching and all this kind of stuff your book, and so you have to put a lot of energy behind that one. So with that close together, it can be difficult because you're having to do both, because the other one is still new enough that you're still having to sort of promote it as well. So I
Yeah.
get that. So
Yeah. That
that
was a
took
challenge for sure.
I'm sure it took a lot of energy.
Yeah, it
And
did.
so that's great. And now, where can the listener get these books anywhere, or is there specific places that you typically send them to?
Yeah, so they're available on Amazon. They're on Barnes and Noble. Um, I believe you can get them through Target if you put them in the Target search engine. They were there last time I looked. Yeah, so they're pretty widely distributed. I think if you're local to Carmel, they're in a couple Carmel, California, which is where I am right now. There are a couple of bookstores here that keep it in stock. River House Books,
Nice.
Pilgrim's Way. Um, but yeah, I think most people probably get it from Amazon.
It's like we get about everything else in our lives
That's
today from
right.
Amazon.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
Amazon owns the world, right?
I know,
So
I know.
well, that is so good. And I think that they both sound so interesting, and I hope that the listener has been intrigued by them, and will find them interesting to read, and they'll go out and get them. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the viewer or listener, that anything about you, about the books, about anything you want them to know, any news or anything?
Um, Goodness, I don't know. Not that
You
I
don't
can
have to.
not that I can think of. No, I hope that the your readers will or listeners will try out one of the books. I hope they like them. They have been so much fun to write, and in the end, my goal as an author is to create things that help you that will just absorb you into the story. I want to write something that will make you burn your dinner because you can't stop reading it. So that's the goal. And I hope you guys think that I met it.
That's a good goal, and I hope they do too, Brooke. And I really do wish you well with this. And listener, do check it out. I will put the links to the books, as well as her biography, and some a little bit about the books. I'm a little limited on space, but I'll try my best to put that there for you so that you can make sure that you'll have access to this. And thank you so much, Brooke, for coming on Book Talks with Keith. I really do appreciate it so much. And I hope that this in some way will help you spread the knowledge about you and your books and the love that you have for the reader. And I just really do appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, it wasn't such a bad experience for your first podcast.
No, this was awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was really lovely.
I'm glad. Thank you so much. You hang on, and I want to speak to you just a little bit after I hit end record. Okay, listener, thank you so much for paying attention to this podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I know that authors that I have on here, as well as myself, really do appreciate your time and your love for all things books. And that's what we're trying to do here. So go support these authors, and I will see you next time and our next episode of Book Talks with Keith. Bye bye, my friend.